Domestic, family and sexual violence is the number one threat to the lives of women and children. Violence against women has been declared a national crisis. The United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime shows us that a woman is killed approximately 1 every 11 minutes. We have to use this moment for real change. Hi, I am Professor Kate Fitzgibbon. I work in the Monash Faculty of Business and Economics and have been researching violence against women and children for over a decade now.
Kate, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you start by giving us a picture of what's happening with gender-based violence, particularly in Australia? Where are we at the moment?
We're in a pretty horrific spot. We know that earlier this year, yet again, violence against women has been declared a national crisis by our Prime Minister. And just in the first 6 months of this year, 49 women have been allegedly killed, most commonly by men known to them. Violence against women and children is prevalent across the entire Australian community. We know that it occurs in a range of different ways. This involves physical violence, sexual violence, coercive and controlling behaviours, financial abuse, economic abuse, a range of different stalking, but also technology-facilitated abuse. So we're seeing a range of different harms, extremely expansive, touching every corner of the Australian community. So there is a significant need for us to upscale our response because this violence is preventable.
And in what ways is the situation with gender-based violence unique in Australia? Are the ways it expresses unique? Are the rates unique? Or is it just uniform across the world?
There's definitely a global problem of gender-based violence. So in Australia, there are unique aspects as to how some of it may manifest or the impacts that it may have or the access to services and responses. But this is a global problem in that there's no communities around the world that we know of. It would be great to have communities that we could study and understand if they are violent-free, but there isn't. We know that globally, the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime shows us that a woman is killed approximately 1 every 11 minutes. Around the world. But there are pockets of better practice. There are new and emerging responses, early intervention and prevention initiatives. So there's certainly a lot that we can learn from other countries and even just within Australia, being in a state and territory system, there's a lot that the Australian states and territories can learn from each other as well in trying to combat and address different aspects of gender-based violence.
Tell us what you've seen in your research about what does seem to be working. Where are we making inroads in reducing this or tackling it before it starts?
Yeah, so this is really critical. We know that all forms of domestic, family and sexual violence are inherently preventable. And that's, there's hope in that.
Yeah.
We can better address this and we can drive the rates down. What we've seen in Australia at the moment, we are 2 years into our 10-year strategy that the Commonwealth Government and all states and territories have signed up to, our national plan to end violence against women and children. And there's some really important features of that plan. We have a focus across prevention, early intervention, response, and then recovery and healing. And that's really important because prior to this plan, there's never been a national focus on recovery and healing. And what that means is that essentially if you survive that crisis moment, that was considered success.
Right, you're on your own now.
You're on your own. We have to want more than that.
Yeah.
We don't want people to merely survive this abuse. We absolutely want them to survive it, but that's not the bar.
Yeah.
That's such a low place to set it. We want people to be able to go on and thrive and live their fullest lives. So the recovery and healing piece is really important and we need to see significant action to realise the ambitions of that. We know that across Australia now, compared to 10 years ago, children and young people receive education around respectful relationships, around awareness of what are acceptable and unacceptable behaviours. So that's a significant shift in how we're engaging young people and educating them about what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviour. There's still significantly more we need to do there, but it's really important to recognise the gains that have come. We also know that across Australian states and territories now, we have much more coordinated and consistent responses across the service system. The challenge there is that predominantly our crisis services are not funded commensurate with the scale of the problem. And that's what we really need to see. If we have governments that proclaim to be committed to ending gender-based violence in one generation, which is the tagline of the national plan, then we need to be fully funded. We need to fund this commensurate with the prevalence across the Australian community.
You mentioned, obviously, the money's probably the biggest thing. Are there any other hurdles that you think are getting in the way to Australia achieving its goals with gender-based violence?
I think a really big hurdle is that there's no quick fix. Politicians want something that they can achieve within the 4-year political cycle. Like, we always understand that. And you want an announcement often. And there's no one single announcement that is going to transform Australia's response to violence against women and children. What we need is a whole program of reform from that full spectrum: prevention, early intervention, response and recovery. Tinkering at any one of those, tinkering with the criminal law, tinkering with bail laws, tinkering with policing, they may be important reforms in and of themselves, but we need to do the whole of system response, and we have to invest in prevention and early intervention because ultimately that's what gets us out of this.
Yeah. And I imagine that stuff is very tricky to measure in the 4-year election cycle. You're probably only going to know what prevention strategies have worked in maybe 20 or 30 years.
Absolutely. And I think that is really challenging, is how long the prevention piece can take. We know research internationally, research done by organisations like Our Watch in Australia shows that violence against women is underpinned by gender inequality and other forms of oppression. But we also know that challenging gender stereotypes, unhealthy attachments between male peers, looking at treatment of girls in the community, these things also can nudge and can improve. So it's really important for us to look at what the range of different interventions can be. There are definite steps to progress that we can make in the shorter term. So we should be ambitious. We should want to do that. We need to engage and work with young men and boys. Importantly, we have to bring them along on the journey.
Yeah.
Ostracising young boys, ostracising men is not going to help us. We need every Australian to feel that they can play a role and that they know what their role is in helping us to address what is a national crisis. We all want more. We all want more for our children than this.
What are victim survivors telling you about the problems they face when they try to seek help at every step along the way? What are some of the barriers that they're experiencing?
Unfortunately, we consistently hear from victim survivors that the barriers to seeking help are significant. Often that can just be the barrier initially within yourself of acknowledging that you are in an abusive relationship and that this isn't a safe relationship for you. So there is still significant work to do across the community about raising awareness of what are abusive behaviours. And we're seeing some of the state and territory governments do that more. New South Wales has just launched a big campaign around different forms of coercive and controlling behaviours and trying to signal to the community this is not okay and you don't have to accept it within your relationship. The next barrier that consistently I hear from victim survivors is the challenge of those initial disclosures to family and friends and the response that sometimes they'll get. And this is really hard because as a family or friend, family member or friend, hearing from someone that they're in an abusive relationship, that they've experienced violence or that they don't feel safe at home can be really challenging and confronting.
Why do we find it challenging, do you think?
I think we're not all, it makes people nervous.
Yeah.
They don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in that discomfort, they may try to either excuse it, explain it away, talk over the victim survivor and actually disempower them in doing that, or to offer a really simplistic response that may not be at all achievable. Just leave him. You can go. Come sleep at mine tonight.
Yeah.
And that may not be possible. That may not be what that victim is wanting in that moment. A lot of people want to stay in their relationship, but they want to stay in it safely. They want the abuse to end, and that can be hard for a family or friend to understand, that they're not asking for help to leave, but they are asking for an understanding and a listening ear. The best thing that I always say to people that you can say if someone discloses violence to you is, I believe you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that happened to you. You may be the first person they've ever told, and you certainly may be the first person that has ever believed them. And that is so powerful. And then ask, what can I do to help you? Because often the ask might be very small. They want you to Sit with them while they look up what services they can access. They'd love you to come along to a counselling session with them. It might be that they are ready and they do want to report to police, and maybe they want to talk through what that looks like. They'd love for you to take their child for the afternoon while they navigate some of these different needs. So it's really important to listen, put the control and the power back in their hands, because by virtue of the abuse they've experienced, they don't have control, they don't have power within their lives. So it's really important to help them rebuild that, if nothing else, in that moment.
If you could change one thing as Prime Minister in terms of how we tackle gender-based violence in Australia, what would you do?
I would make it a national priority.
And you don't think it
commensurate
is?
with submarines.
Okay.
We do need to make this a national priority in the same way that national security is. Domestic, family and sexual violence is the number one threat to the lives of women and children in Australia. Yet we still see national security external threats are considered on a completely different level. They're committed to the immediate action that come from a national security threat. Whereas time and time again, we see these little peak moments. And, earlier this year we had a national cabinet meeting on the topic of violence against women. That's never happened before. So those moments are really important. But the actions lag.
What do you think that is? Why do you think as a nation, and maybe many countries are like this, we do seem to prioritise things like national security in a way that we don't violence against women and children? Is it the sort of the banality of evil? It's just so common and so everyday that we kind of have awfully become used to it in a way that we don't with terrorism, for example.
I really worry that's right. And I think a lot about the fact over the last 2-3 years, the media has become a lot better at reporting violence against women more frequently. Some of that reporting is still highly concerning and problematic. But I look at the way in which now I don't think that statistic of one woman dies on average every week shocks people anymore. I think people have got very used to reading it.
Yeah.
That's one woman in Australia a week is killed. That in any given year, more women are killed by men known to them in Australia than Australians that have been killed by acts of terrorism since September 11. Yet it is that disassociation. We are more scared of stranger danger. We're more scared of acts of violence that occur through things like terrorism, through public acts of violence, than the fact that women in Australia are significantly more at risk of violence in their homes with the people that they should most trust. We're still othering that. We're still feeling like it's someone else's problem, when for 1 in 3 Australians, it is their problem. It is their reality.
What's giving you hope in this area?
That we're talking about it. This is so important. We are having significantly more conversations about it. Certainly in 2024, it has been on the policy agendas of every Australian state and territory and the Commonwealth Government. Yes, I'd like to see more action, but it would be remiss not to acknowledge that there is significantly more conversation and action than we've ever had before. So we have to use this moment for real change. I think we're having really good and challenging dialogues. We're critically asking what is going to move us forward, and there's different views on that, and that's important. We should be leaning into all of those because everyone wants to get to the same outcome. There's no single answer. So let's sit, let's toss around the ideas. Let's think about what can move us forward. Let's commit, let's fund them. Let's fund them in the longer term. And critically, of course, the academic's going to say this, but let's collect the data and evaluate what works. We don't want to sit here in 10 years' time and go, we did some good things there, but we don't really know what moved the dial. So that data piece is really important, and particularly data on perpetration. In no other area would we try and reduce or address something without looking at the root cause. So we need to be better understanding people who use violence, what's driving that violence and perpetration.
Kate, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.